Hey guys, Palsteron here, and today let's talk about why you're poor in softcore trade. First up, I'm not going to tell you how to play the game. If you don't care about currency, that's awesome. If you play solo self-found, if you have certain restrictions that you put on yourself, if you like immortal builds and you're fine shield charging around with 20% movement speed, that is totally fine. There's nothing against that. I'm here to answer people who do care. So if you're a solo self-found player or a hardcore player, this video is completely useless for you. Now, my inspiration for this video came from this post on Reddit, which states, it feels like the best builds are incredibly janky, and then basically listing what they don't like about certain league starters, etc., or what they perceive to be the best builds. Now, why does that have anything to do with currency? Let me explain. Now, two things I like to do in terms of content are builds and currency strats, right? And I feel like people do not realize to what extent those kind of go hand in hand. I don't know if you guys realize, but I usually make a build and then I make a farming strat where the build excels at it. And there is a reason for that. Now, let's go over the first reason, which I think, honestly, if I had to guess, is probably the reason why 90% of you guys struggle. And that is your build excels at nothing. Your build has to have a goal. It has to have something that it does well. Now, what do all-rounder builds excel at? Mostly league start. Now, sure, you could play a squishy mapper and just waltz through the game and buy boss completions, but that's like telling you to roll Awakened Sextants in your hideout and just make currency that way. I'm talking about just playing the game. And I'm talking about unlocking everything needed for your farming strats with your league starter. So unlocking the game, clearing the end game, right? And what is that? Number one, all your wash stones, and then all your favorite slots. Now, you might have noticed that I didn't talk about Ubers, and that's because Ubers are completely useless in softcore. Now, why are Ubers bait? That is because they corner you into build-making decisions that make your builds slower. Builds who want to clear Uber need more damage and more survivability than normal builds, for example, a mapper or anything else that you can specialize in on softcore, and therefore, you will have to sacrifice those things to get the things that get you an easier Uber experience. However, the second thing is even more important. Ubers are basically a skill check. There's people who can do Ubers on 2 mil DPS, and there's people who can't on 100 million. If you understand the mechanics, yes, it's Uber viable. Is this build Uber viable? I don't know. Maybe for you, maybe for me, I have no idea. Now, there are people who can make money with Ubers, and those are the people who, once again, specialize in it. They go in, they don't really care about movement speed. They go in, throw their traps, or do whatever, cast on death, boom, falls over. Do it again, repeat for 1,000 times. Compare that with you kind of struggling with the Uber boss for a minute or so, finally beating it and dropping nothing. And you're like, oh, I didn't drop a Nemesis again. It doesn't matter. They're not supposed to. They're a complete bait. Ubers can make you a ton of money, but only over the long term, and for people who are extremely fast at them. Now, before I tell you the solution to this, which is already getting quite obvious, I want to talk about playing the best builds. And as an example here, I want to take Seismic Trap, which was regarded by a ton of people, I think ever since 3.16, was it 16, 17, up to like last league as one of, if not the best build. And if we look at the things you would usually look at, right? Effective health pool, max hit across the board. Recovery is not great, but you can usually make up for that. Movement speed is not great. Shield charge. All right, but then you realize that is on extremely budget gear, other than Devouring the Item. That changed a lot for Seismic Trap as well. But let's say, for example, 3.19, right? I mean, this build is incredible on paper. But let's ask the question, what does Seismic Trap actually excel at? In softcore, absolutely nothing. Legions, garbage. Boss rushing, garbage. Simulacrum, 5 rewards. Blight, terrible. Heist, terrible. This build fits into no niche, and that is because it's not made for softcore. It is made for hardcore solo self-found. And there we get into the softcore versus hardcore divide. What is good in softcore is very different to what is good in hardcore. Softcore has an incredibly competitive trading community, whereas hardcore has been absolutely destroyed by the invention of solo self-found. A lot of people who play hardcore that used to be in trade now play solo self-found, and that has really taken a toll on the economy. And also, hardcore players need to play different builds because they can't just die. Nobody is going to tell a hardcore player to just get more movement speed and sacrifice defensive layers. That would be stupid. On softcore, it's exactly the other way around, at least if you care about currency. Now, is that hardcore players' fault that you're poor? Of course not. You're asking a hardcore player what they want to play. You are looking at hardcore racers and thinking, oh, those are the best builds. I have to play those at League Start as well. that is your fault. And as well as that, the Path of Exile builds Reddit and other communities, which are so hyper-focused nowadays on getting defensive layers on every single softcore build, even those that excel at things that don't even need defenses. Now, why is everybody so hyper-focused on defensive layers nowadays? It's because they all have PTSD from the time frame of 3.15 to 3.19. Now, 3.15 was Expedition League, and this is where basically the game went into a little bit of a different direction. Basically, what they did is they nerfed all support gems across the board to basically give players a lot less inherent power. What was the problem with that is support gems used to be free, right? So at League Start, you would have free power. You don't have to pay any money. You just buy them from the gem vendor. And most builds lost 40 to 50% of their damage. It was absolutely insane, and it made League starting just a lot less annoying and a lot more restrictive. Then we had 3.16, which saw the armor and evasion rework, as well as that spell suppression, I should also mention, which is still a huge thing in the game. Armor, evasion, spell suppression. This basically meant that it was way more competitive for softcore players to actually get defensive layers. Back in the day, you used to just get acrobatics, phase acrobatics, and just get a lot of dodge. If you don't know about those times, forget about it. It was squishy days back then. So we had 3.15, 3.16, and then 3.18 came around, and that was probably the biggest shakeup. And while Sentinel League, which is 3.18, is remembered as a crazy good league, that is only because they nerfed Arch Nemesis immediately. Arch Nemesis was introduced in 3.18. And what that did to the game is the baseline got so much harder. Even if you just went Elk and Go, you would just get randomly one-tapped, right? Even with defensive layers. You were asked to do so much defensively for your build just to run a non-juiced map. And even though we had the tools now from 3.16, well, it doesn't matter because you have to still invest into it. It's not like it's free. The tools are there, but now you have to use it, and that will take away from damage or movement speed. 3.19 saw them doubling down on Arch Nemesis, which made it such a disaster. I know League of Kalandra was a bad league in general, but let's be real, the reason was the base game, coupled with the doubling down of nerfing Harvest, removing prefixes can't be changed, suffixes can't be changed from the table, and it was a catastrophe. The game was in the worst state of all time. 3.20, Forbidden Sanctum, saw a comeback in a big way. This is where the game got more vanilla again. We're now in a time frame where you actually don't have to be hyper tanky to do the most normal Elk and Go or boss rushing style. But people just don't realize. Subtractim makes a video about haste now being good, determination being more and more overrated, especially now with the Molten Shell nerf. Everybody is swapping over to Lightning Coil Taste of Hate, and he gets laughed at it for. And I just want to remind everybody, what makes you no currency on softcore? Defenses. Do you want to be squishy and die all the time and have cast on Death Portal? Of course you don't. You don't have to anymore. Since 3.16, that is not the case anymore. You can have Grace and Spell Suppression on every single build, and you should. But what makes you no currency? It's defenses. As long as you don't have a character that's completely out of paper, as long as it can do what it's supposed to do, fill its niche, you're going to make currency. And every bit and every ounce of extra defense you have that you don't need, you're misallocating. Stop jerking yourself off over max hit and effective hit pool. It doesn't matter unless you actually need it for the content you're gonna run. Most people on softcore do normal mapping. They boss rush, they Elk and Go, they do legions. They don't do 100% LE, they don't need that. Focus on easy defenses that aren't that much investment, especially if you don't have that much currency. You're going to have to sacrifice something, and if you care about currency, a little bit of that will have to be defense. That doesn't mean that you have to be paper though. You can get 4 to 5k life pretty easy. There is no reason why you can't have Grace. There is no reason why you can't have Spell Suppression, at least on the right side of the tree. On the left side of the tree, you can have Determination because you have a little bit more armor support. And if you're on the right side of the tree, you stack Physical taken as Ellie with stuff like Taste of Hate, your Helmet, or maybe Lightning Coil. Guard skills are usually free, whether that's Molten Shell, whether that's Immortal Call, or Steel Skin even. And sure, this has a lot to do with player preference, yada yada yada. But what does actually make you currency? And this obviously depends on what you're farming, but in general, movement speed, you complete something faster. Damage, you kill something faster. Area of effect, you have less stragglers, less monsters remaining at the end of the map. Projectile speed, if you're fast enough, your projectiles have to keep up with that, or your tornado shot, and projectile speed is basically AoE. And I wanted to put quant at the end here because it's obvious, but I just want to make you understand, these are all currency multipliers. Quantity usually should come in at the end when you already have your build established. It's already good, right? You already have some currency into it, so you can take away character power to introduce some quantity. But until then, these are usually even more efficient. So what is the obvious conclusion here? That is just make specialized builds. I wrote down just a few things you can do. There is 100 more. You just have to pick something and then be good at it. Your build should be forged into whatever you want to run. For example, I'm currently running a build that already has like 30 or 40% fizz taken as. So if I would run a lightning coil, I would get a lot tankier. However, I want to do boss rushing, so Queen of the Forest is the obvious choice, so I'm faster. I don't have anything really killing me, even without a Headhunter, and I'm running Metamorphs with 500% more life, with the Sextant and also the Atlas passive tree, and they still don't really one-shot me. Why? Because I also invested into damage, meaning they can't one-shot me. They're basically dead. So that is what I mean. You have to adapt to certain things and not just look at these numbers all the time. You have to understand PoB, and most people just don't. Next tip, stop making your builds janky. What do I mean by that? There's things that don't show up on PoB that will make your builds a lot more fun. A lot of people don't even look at movement speed. They look at max hit, recovery, damage, right? That's what people focus on. For example, on this build here with Queen of the Forest, I'm taking Fleetfoot and I'm taking freedom of movement plus this mastery right here. It gives me like 30-40% movement speed and the extra evasion scales as well. It made the build feel incredible. First, I had a cluster here and I was like, there's something missing, and I just unspected. I lost like 20% of my damage. Does it matter? No, as long as what I'm farming with the build isn't compromised, it's actually an upgrade. But if you just look at the stats in PoB, you're gonna say, I wonder if Palsteron knew if you remove these points, it got a little bit more damage. No, that's not how it works. Actually play the builds in game and you're gonna figure out what feels best. Or an even more specific example, back when I made a Mauve Mischief Elementalist to test for League Start, I got asked a lot about these 2 points right here, Spiritual Command and Minion Attack Speed, right? If you don't know that build, you basically want minion life, otherwise you have nothing to do with minions. So people were asking me, Pal, did you know that attack speed doesn't scale your damage at all? Well, no shit, I need it for shield charge speed. These 2 nodes make my build feel a ton less shitty. Will you see it here? I can't see anything. Does my max hit go up? Does my damage go up? I don't think so. Make builds that are meant to be played, not builds that you show other people and they're judging it and they don't have any idea what's going on. Make builds that you want to play. All right, so now you think I'm an elitist, totally fine, but let's talk about the shitty conclusion and understand this, okay? If you just want to play one build per league, not everybody has that much time to reroll into multiple characters. Not everybody has Path of Exile as their main game. What's the conclusion here if you play one build per league? That is, you're at a clear disadvantage. You have to get your expectations right here. That is just the truth. Because you're competing in the trade economy with people who do these things and they specialize at them, right? You're competing with them over items like Headhunter or Mageblood, and you're just there wondering, why the hell can't I get to it? And it's because they're more efficient at whatever they're doing than you doing everything a little bit. And if you're a player who says, but I want to be immortal, there's payoffs for that. You can be immortal on softcore. Just understand that comes with this, right? You're not going to be as fast to farm this up. If you play 15 hours a day, 10 hours a day, I mean, of course you're going to get there, but for a normal person, you can't get there. You're competing with people who are hyper efficient. I understand that all-rounders let you do everything in the game without you ever having to reroll. But one thing I can tell you from almost a decade now experience is the most fun I personally have in PoE is if I absolutely annihilate content. Not if I barely can do it and I just like half clear a Legion or something. No, if you have a build that actually is supposed to be there. Then there's one more thing I really want to talk about, which mostly comes from experienced players giving new players advice, which is the worst possible advice. And if you're watching this, right, and you're a new player or even mid-tier player, you don't really know how to make currency, maybe this video could help you, maybe not. And they tell you, just make currency with whatever, bro. It doesn't matter as long as you stick to it. That is the dumbest thing you can say to a new player ever. In theory, that's correct. If you know what you're doing, if you have enough experience, you can make currency with whatever in this game. I just gave you all these examples, right? You can make currency with all of these. It doesn't matter. One is like 7 divines per hour this league, one is 6. It shifts a little bit, but in general, play what you want is true, but for new players, it's completely delusional. That's like telling somebody who's new to cooking, don't use a recipe from some chef cook. No, you're gonna use that recipe and you're gonna use another recipe and another one. And at some point you can see the patterns that are true throughout all of these strats. And now you're like, oh, I don't need this Palsteron guy anymore. But until then, you should follow a recipes until you can say, okay, I can do whatever I want. And when you're at that stage, it's a really cool feeling. At that point, you can also play all-rounder builds a lot more again because you're going to be more efficient. So whereas most all-rounder builds wouldn't excel at something just because of your experience, you can get back in there. And until then, I understand it's harsh. This game is so vast nowadays. I had the luck to start learning it 10 years ago. It was nothing in terms of complexity as it is now. I could learn over the years, slowly build up my knowledge base. And you're thrown into this game with complete content like overload. So going back to the starting post right here, I feel really bad about this because you need specialized builds unless you have 500 to 1,000 divines where you can make every build kind of into an all-rounder build, right? Sure. But realistically, do something well and your build is going to feel godly. And there's so much more we could be talking about, from trading to how to navigate the trade website, on how to craft and lose less currency. But that has to be left for another video. All I can say at the end of this video is play a build that feels good at a certain special content, a build that you have fun with. Get some kind of recipe from whoever you trust for that content. Repeat. Do it over and over again. And next time, try something new. Maybe that's something you like more. And once you have a vast knowledge base, you can basically do whatever you want, bro. But that's it. Rant over.